a gram-negative cell envelope. These are gram-negative rods. They are not stained very well with gram stain. For none of these rickettsia, you find that we do a gram staining in spite of having a gram-negative cell wall. So if somebody asks what is the cell wall structure of rickettsia, you will say it is gram-negative. But if somebody says, do you do routinely gram staining to demonstrate rickettsia? No. Okay. Very important point, all rickettsia are obligate intracellular. That is, they can only multiply within a host cell. They cannot multiply outside a cell. Hence, knowing this fact, it is pretty easy to understand that none of rickettsia can be cultured on an artificial medium like blood agar, chocolate agar, this agar, that agar. It requires a live cell for it to be able to grow. So therefore, it cannot be grown on any of the artificial media. Okay, just like viruses are all obligate intracellular, there are certain bacteria which are also obligate intracellular. This is one of the few bacteria that I'm discussing which are obligate intracellular. As I said, it's a zoonotic infection. The main reservoir are basically the animal, and certain arthropod vectors may also act as reservoirs. The infection is transmitted largely by insect vectors. Humans, however, are the accidental hosts. So when they venture into the environment which is having that animal or the arthropod vector, you can contract the infection through the arthropod. However, the exception to this rule is Rickettsia prowazekii. We are going to cover this. This is a causative agent of epidemic typhus. Epidemic typhus basically occurs only in humans. So the humans are the only reservoir. So if somebody asks, all of the rickettsia are zoonotic infections, and what is the exception to this rule? So always remember, epidemic typhus, which is caused by Rickettsia prowazekii, is an exception to this rule in not being a zoonotic infection. Though our mandate is to talk about zoonotic infections only, I cannot leave this out because it is part of rickettsia and you need to know this organism also. So as to have this important perspective that some exceptions do exist, which I'm going to highlight as we go to proceed. We have two very important genera which belong to Rickettsia. These are Rickettsia and Orientia. Bulk of the species of Rickettsia I'm going to mention in a table. And there is only one species of Orientia which is pathogenic for us, Orientia tsutsugamushi. We're going to talk about that also. We divide clinically rickettsial infections into three groups. These are typhus fever group, and two organisms are there in it. These are Rickettsia prowazekii and Rickettsia typhi. Rickettsia prowazekii causes epidemic typhus. Rickettsia typhi is the cause of endemic typhus. And then we have got a whole big group of spotted fever group. Spotted fever group, it includes Rickettsia rickettsii, Rickettsia connori, Rickettsia australis, siberica, and acari. And collectively, these are called as spotted fever group. And the third one is scrub typhus. Though it is called as scrub typhus, we conventionally don't include it in the typhus fever group. We write about it separately as scrub typhus. This is, as I said, caused by Orientia tsutsugamushi. This is a very important table. A lot of questions can be answered, especially with regard to your PG entrance exam. With regard to rickettsia, every paper in your PG entrance exam has got a question on rickettsia, so therefore it is advisable to know important facts about these set of organisms. Epidemic typhus, as I said, is caused by Rickettsia prowazekii. The vector is louse. Then endemic typhus is caused by Rickettsia typhi, and the vector is rat flea. Then we have got the spotted fever group, which includes Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is a disease which is caused by Rickettsia rickettsii, and that vector is the heart tick. Indian tick typhus is caused by Rickettsia connori, and the vector is again heart tick. Australian tick typhus, as the name suggests, is found in Australia. It is caused by Rickettsia australis. Again, the vector is heart tick. And then we have got Siberian tick typhus, which is found in Siberia, which is northern part of Russia, caused by Rickettsia siberica. Again, the vector is heart tick. Then we've got rickettsial pox, which is caused by Rickettsia acari, and the vector is mite. So I put this red rectangle around it. All of these spotted fevers are all transmitted by heart ticks. Hence, all of these four collectively are referred to as tick-borne spotted fevers, or TBSF. So if the question is asked, which is not a tick-borne spotted fever, what would be your answer? Quick answer. Jaldi do beta answer. Which of the following is not a tick-borne spotted fever? Quick answer. I want an answer from you. Jaldi bata beta. Which of the following is not a tick-borne spotted fever? Good. Good, Purna. Very good. Rickettsial pox. All other spotted fever groups are transmitted by heart tick with the exception of rickettsial pox. Hence, the rest of the group is called as a TBSF except rickettsial pox. Okay, I'll tell you the importance of this as we proceed further. Lastly, we've got scrub typhus, which is, as I said, caused by Orientia tsutsugamushi. Okay, Orientia tsutsugamushi. We'll one by one cover these diseases, starting with the spotted fever group. We'll talk about the most important one, that is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is caused by Rickettsia rickettsii. All the organisms in the Rickettsia, they basically infect and they multiply in the vascular endothelium. And they principally cause the damage of the vascular endothelium, because of which one of the classical manifestations that you get is rash in most of the rickettsial infections. So please remember this. And the same goes true with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So it adheres to the vascular endothelial cells and it is taken in the phagosome. It is released from the phagosome into the cytoplasm, where it multiplies and causes eventually the damage of the vascular endothelium. And because of this damage to the vascular endothelium, the blood extravasates and you get the rash which occurs on the skin if the vessels of the skin are involved. And if there's a major damage which occurs to the blood vessels, there's a major leakage of the blood which occurs. This leads to hypovolemic shock and damage to the other organs. And in some cases, the disease can be so severe that the person can even die. So there might also be a fatality. Okay. Insect vector is heart tick, and there are two heart ticks which are responsible. These are Dermacentor variabilis and Dermacentor andersoni. The disease is particularly prevalent in April, during April to September. That's the time of the activity of the ticks, and that's why the tick bite becomes more common during these months. And that's why the disease is seasonal, and you find usually between April and September. And disease is present in US in the Rocky Mountains area, and that's why the disease is called as Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Okay. You need to be exposed to the tick for a very long time, and you don't actually get any pain while the tick bite occurs. And more than 6 hours of exposure is required for a person to get the transmission of infection. So most of the times you never come to know that the tick is bound to you. It silently feeds on you, and prolonged contact time is required for the disease to be transmitted. So therefore, the patient who's been bitten by a tick for such a long duration of time may not actually recall it. The incubation period after the tick bite for the development of the clinical symptoms is about 7 days, average about 1 week. And the disease manifests in the form of non-specific symptoms, initially in the form of fever and headache. And then the person might have malaise, myalgia, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. And these are all non-specific symptoms. At this point, you cannot differentiate from other diseases. Then the rash develops after about 3 days. And this is a classical thing. The rash of Rocky Mountain spotted fever first appears on the wrist, arms, ankles, palms, and soles. And then it appears on the rest of the body, particularly the trunk. So it comes from the periphery to the central area. In all other rickettsial infections, please remember the rash first appears on the trunk and then it goes to the extremity. The only exception to this rule, please remember, is Rocky Mountain spotted fever, where the rash first occurs on the extremities and then it comes to the trunk. Very, very important clinical feature. And this comes as a clinical question in your PG entrance exams. And you have to take this cue, understand this, what the question is conveying, and then be able to answer this. As the disease becomes more severe, there may be pulmonary involvement, renal involvement, and cardiac involvement, and the person can even die. Fatality rate, especially in the people who are not treated in time, could be as high as about 10 to 25%. 1/4 of the untreated people may die. Okay, there is a very effective treatment available. We'll come to that. So this is just to show the rash. It is occurring on the ankles and on the palms over here, and then it spreads to the central zone. That is the trunk. How do you diagnose? Microscopy can be done, but it is not of much value because the sensitivity is poor. But you can still do it. As I said, it cannot be stained with the Gram stain. We require to do Giemsa and Gimenez stains, and you collect the sample from the lesion to be able to demonstrate. But then most of the times you are still not able to demonstrate. Sensitivity is poor. We can also do direct fluorescent antibody staining using antibodies to stain the organism. Molecular assays are available like PCR, but the sensitivity of PCR is not good with blood. Again, culture is possible, but please remember as a golden rule for all rickettsial infections, though the culture is possible, only reference labs do the culture because there is a high risk of transmission of infection to the operators. So therefore, it might be dangerous for the operators to be, or the laboratory persons who are not well trained to culture the organism, can be easily transmitted to the technical people. So we can culture it from the blood. You take the buffy coat of the blood or the skin biopsy, and you can use tissue culture systems or immunized hen's egg for culture. But neither of these techniques, as I said, are commonly used. The mainstay of diagnosis is serology, wherein you demonstrate the specific antibody in the patient's blood for diagnostic purposes. For diagnostic purposes, a very old test, which is actually obsolete, but a lot of questions are still asked, is a Weil-Felix reaction. Weil-Felix reaction is a heterophile agglutination test wherein you take the antigens from non-motile strains of Proteus, that is OX19, 2, and K. Proteus is a totally different organism, but its antigens are similar to some antigens of Rickettsia. So you detect the antibody by reacting it with the Proteus antigens, but you diagnose rickettsial infection. Such type of tests are basically called as heterophile tests. In a normal serological test, you take the antigen from that organism itself against which you want to detect the antibody. But if you take the antigen from another source to which it is similar and detect the antibody to another infection, such tests are called as heterophile agglutination tests, and many other heterophile tests we are going to cover in future as we are going to move along with microbiology. So these are the three antigens we use: OX19, 2, and K. In case of Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and indeed in case of all tick-borne spotted fevers, the antibodies are raised against both OX19 and 2, while antibodies are not raised against OXK. I'll show you an important table for your convenience, because a lot of questions are asked in your exams. These tests, at least in Western world, is not done because of poor sensitivity and specificity. Yet it is a very common test which is performed in India, and therefore a lot of questions are asked in Indian exams. So therefore, you need to know. We also have a microimmunofluorescence test, which is now considered to be the gold standard test for detecting the antibody, and it tells you about the species-specific antibodies in the blood of the patient. And these antibodies start to become detectable at around 6 weeks of illness. A lot of commercial ELISA tests are also now become available to detect a specific antibody in the patient's blood. These can also be used for diagnostic purposes. But the reference test is microimmunofluorescence. So just to give you an idea about Weil-Felix test, I'm going to refer to Weil-Felix test quite a lot actually. So I'm going to cover it here itself, and I'm going to refer it later on at an appropriate place. So just remember, in case of epidemic typhus and endemic typhus, antibodies are formed mainly against OX19, while no antibodies formed, or very little antibodies formed against OX2 and OXK. Whereas in case of all tick-borne spotted fevers, including Rocky Mountain spotted fever that we just covered, antibodies are formed against both OX19 and 2, while no antibodies formed against OXK. While in case of scrub typhus, we don't get antibodies usually against OX19 and 2, while large amount of antibodies are formed against OXK. Okay, so this table is extremely important. But having said that, I'd like to mention over here that not every infection can be diagnosed by Weil-Felix reaction. Rickettsial pox, Q fever, Brill-Zinsser's disease. I'm going to talk about Brill-Zinsser's disease a few moments from now. These are the diseases for which the Weil-Felix reaction has got no value because it cannot be diagnosed. Okay. So this table, there are two tables which are extremely important as far as your exams are concerned. One is the table showing you the names of the diseases, the causative agents, and the vectors, and this table. If you remember these two tables, a lot of questions can be answered in your exam. Treatment for all forms of rickettsial infection, please remember, as a blanket rule, is doxycycline. It is a lifesaver. If you give doxycycline well in time, you can actually save the life of the person. And this holds true for all rickettsial infections. So as a golden rule, you can remember it. Then we talk about rickettsial pox. Rickettsial pox is not a TB-SF or a tick-borne spotted fever because it is transmitted instead by mite. The causative agent is Rickettsia acari. It has got a worldwide distribution, and the insect vector, as I mentioned, is a mite. The infection occurs normally in rodents. It occurs in rodents, and the rodents are the reservoirs, including the mites. Actually, mites, it is transferred from one generation to the other generation through transovarial transmission. So rodents and mites are the reservoirs of infection. Okay, humans are the accidental hosts. When they venture into the environment or are bitten by the mite, they get infected. You get a biphasic illness with rickettsial pox. So once the bite occurs with the mite, after about a week, you get an ulceration and a dark colored scab is formed. And this is, we use a word for it, we call it as an eschar. Is formed, and that's the initial phase of the illness. In the second phase of the illness, you get abrupt high fever, headache, chills, myalgia, non-specific symptoms. And thereafter, you get a papulovesicular rash thereafter. But the disease is not at all dangerous, unlike Rocky Mountain spotted fever, where the untreated disease can kill you. Here, even if you don't get the treatment, the complications are not there. The disease is mild, and the recovery usually is a rule without any complications. And if the treatment is to be given, again, doxycycline is a drug of choice. So with this, we are through with the spotted fevers. The other spotted fevers, just remember the name. Indian tick typhus is prevalent in India, and it is caused by Rickettsia conori, and the vector is heart tick. Australian tick typhus is found in Australia, caused by Rickettsia australis, and the vector is again heart tick. And lastly is the Siberian tick typhus, caused by Rickettsia siberica. Again, the vector is heart tick, and the symptoms are pretty much similar that I've explained for Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Okay. So with this, we are through with the spotted fever group. Now I'm going to shift my attention to typhus fever group. There are two typhus fevers we're going to discuss: epidemic typhus and endemic typhus. Regarding the epidemic typhus, it is caused by Rickettsia prowazekii. It is also called as louse-borne typhus because it is transmitted by louse. As I mentioned right at the beginning in my opening remarks, it is not a zoonotic infection. All the rickettsial infections are zoonotic infections except this one. The principal reservoir is human. The disease only occurs in humans, and the insect vector which transmits this infection is the body louse, that is Pediculus humanus. From one human to the other human, there is no animal reservoir of this infection. Please remember this. The disease particularly occurs in crowded, unsanitary conditions, especially if there is a huge migration of the human population. If there is a huge migration of the human population, just a minute. Huge migration of the human population, like to occur in these situations. If there is a civil unrest, these are the situations where the disease tends to occur. It is found in, reported in Central and South America and in Africa. Okay. There is also another form of the disease which is caused by the same bacterium, that is recrudescent disease. So in some cases, a person might recover from epidemic typhus, but the organism lies silent within the tissues as a latent infection. And this can get reactivated after many months to years. And this reactivation illness then is called as Brill-Zinsser's disease. Now, this is a reactivation illness and not a fresh infection. Reactivation of the old latent infection after you recover from epidemic typhus. So if I ask this question, listen to this question carefully. What is the vector for Brill-Zinsser's disease? What would be your answer? Quick, this is a trick question that you get in your exams, especially PG exams. Bataiye beta. What is the vector for Brill-Zinsser's disease? Quick answer beta. What is the vector beta? पूछा मैंने, causative agent नहीं पूछा मैंने. So everybody is then following into this trap beta. You will not say louse. There is no vector for Brill-Zinsser's disease because it is a reactivation illness. Got it? So please don't say louse. It is a reactivation illness. The organism is lying in you after you recovered from epidemic typhus for months to years, and one fine day it decides to multiply again and then again cause disease. Hence, it does not require a vector for a fresh infection. I hope it is clear, this concept. We try to ask this question quite a bit so as to trap you into giving a wrong answer. So I hope you got the point. The average incubation period for epidemic typhus is again about a week. And again, non-specific symptoms begin like fever, headache, myalgia, and the rash develops. Rash, as I said, starts in the trunk and then spreads to the extremity. That's a usual case except RMSF. Mortality rate is pretty high, about 20 to 30%. Brill-Zinsser's disease, as I said, is a reactivation illness. Brill-Zinsser's disease is a milder form of illness. So if the question is asked, epidemic typhus is more severe or Brill-Zinsser's disease is more severe, your answer would be epidemic typhus. Brill-Zinsser's disease is a less severe disease, and usually the rash is also absent. Okay, so please remember these important facts. Diagnosis can be done by Weil-Felix reaction to detect the specific antibodies. And as I mentioned earlier in the table, the antibody is chiefly formed against OX19 and it is not formed against OX2 and OXK. However, the most important serological test is microimmunofluorescence, wherein you detect the specific antibody, and this is actually replacing Bielefeld reaction, especially in Western countries. Drug of choice is doxycycline, as I mentioned earlier, and louse control measures. Now we come to the next of the typhus fever, that is endemic typhus, which is caused by Rickettsia typhi. Endemic typhus is also referred to as murine typhus. Murine means something to do with rodents, because rodents are the main reservoirs of infection, particularly the rats. Again, the disease has got a worldwide distribution. The principal reservoir is rat within the rodents, and the infection is transmitted from rats to humans, or within rats by rat flea, and humans can also get infected through the rat flea. The scientific name for rat flea is Xenopsella chopsis. The scientific name is Xenopsella chopsis. The incubation period is about week to maybe 2 weeks, and again, abdomen, then it spreads to the extremity. And this is a much milder disease if you compare it with either epidemic typhus or RMSF. Most of the cases resolve on their own without any treatment. Bielefeld reaction is just like epidemic typhus, wherein the antibody is raised only against OX19, but not against OX2 and OXK. Microimmunofluorescence test is also available for diagnosis of endemic typhus. Drug of choice again is doxycycline. So if you see, endemic typhus is a much milder disease if you compare it with epidemic typhus. For epidemic typhus, it's the vector is louse, body louse, whereas for endemic typhus it is rat flea. Epidemic typhus is not a zoonotic infection. Endemic typhus is a zoonotic infection where the main reservoir is actually the rat. Now we come to a very important rickettsial infection as far as your Indian context is concerned, and that is strep typhus, because we are reporting large number of cases of strep typhus in India. So therefore, you have to know this disease very well. Strep typhus is caused by Orientia tsutsugamushi. It was formerly classified within Rickettsia. Earlier, when I was a student, just like you, we used to study it as Rickettsia tsutsugamushi. But it has been assigned a new genus, that is Orientia, because there are certain properties which make it distinct from Rickettsia. The insect vector is a trombiculid mite, and within the mites, it is the larval forms of the mite which actually transmit the infection, because it is the larval form only which actually bites the human. The larval form of the mite is also called as Chigger, Chigger. The reservoirs are the rodents and the mites. Within mites, you get a transvariant transmission, so therefore the infection is transmitted from one generation of mite to the other. So both rodents and mites act as the reservoir, and mite is obviously also the vector. Now, this is a question that you get in your exams. What is a zoonotic tetrad? So require 4 things for the disease to be present. This includes mites, the insect vector which transmits the infection, the rodent, which is naturally infected with this bacterium, scrubby vegetation. That's why the name you have is scrub typhus. Scrubby vegetation is basically a shrubby vegetation, a low level of vegetation where you find infestation with rodents and their mites. And obviously the agent, that is the positive agent, Orientia tsutsugamushi. So if you have these 4 things, and if the human ventures into that geographical area, there is a chance that the person might get infected. There is a geographical location in the world where the disease has been reported, and this is called as Tsutsugamushi Triangle. Tsutsugamushi Triangle is actually the western part of the Indian subcontinent, that is the part of Pakistan, and towards the east it is the northern part of Japan and the northern part of Russia, and in the southern part is basically Australia. So the triangle which is formed in these by these 3 locations is the place where the disease is endemic, and this is called as Tsutsugamushi Triangle, where the disease are reported mainly from. Okay. In India, the disease is particularly prevalent, and large number of cases are being reported in the sub-Himalayan region, in the sub-Himalayan belt, right from Jammu and Kashmir to Himachal, right across Nepal, into the other northeastern states. So the whole belt, large number of cases actually are reported. So it's a very common disease in our country, especially in the sub-Himalayan belt, that you need to know. The incubation period is about a week or 2 weeks. Again, same symptoms start with the non-specific symptoms like headache, fever, myalgias. Now, again, you get an eschar at the site of the bite, and it is a very important clinical feature that you need to remember. So the site of the bite with the mite, it's all rhyming, site, bite, mite. You get a black colored scab which is formed, which is, I'll just show you the picture. This is the eschar which is formed, which is surrounded by a reddish area due to erythema. And this is followed by development of the maculopapular rash, which starts to occur on the trunk and then it spreads to the rest of the body. A very unusual feature that you get as a clinical marker of this disease is a generalized lymphadenopathy. Most of the other rickettsial infections, you generally don't get lymphadenopathy, particularly generalized lymphadenopathy. So whenever you get a history of truncal rash with the presence of eschar with generalized lymphadenopathy as a clinical question, always think in terms of scrub typhus, and this is a clinical question that you get in your exams. This is then associated with splenomegaly. Many people, if the treatment is not given in time, may develop heart failure and die because of this. Diagnosis is mainly again by serology. You detect the antibodies, Wheal-Phillips reaction. The most important antigen is a very important question that you get in your exam is OXK. Large chunk of antibodies are formed against OXK. We can also do microimmunofluorescence test, and then ELISA tests are also available in the market. Commercial ELISAs are available, and as I said earlier, doxycycline is a drug of choice. It's a lifesaver. Immediately when you make a diagnosis, please remember you make a clinical diagnosis. You don't wait for laboratory diagnosis. Immediately you start with doxycycline, you save a certain life. So doxycycline is lifesaver in these situations, particularly with regard to rickettsial infection. This is the image of eschar. Now we come to Coxiella burnetii. Again, a very interesting bacterium. A lot of questions again can be formed and can be asked on Coxiella burnetii. Again, Coxiella burnetii was initially classified in rickettsia only. When I was an undergraduate, we used to study it in rickettsia. But later on, molecular studies were carried out, and it was realized that it is not closely related to rickettsia, but it is related to another bacterium, that is Legionella. We'll learn about Legionella later on. And the disease which is caused by Coxiella burnetii is got an interesting name, that is called as Q fever. The letter Q actually comes from the word query. This disease was first identified in Australia, but when the investigations were made, the positive agent could not be found, and hence the name was given to it query. But it is no longer a query. Later on, we found out the cause, that is Coxiella burnetii, but then initially the cause was not known. Hence, the name was given to it query fever. So it comes from the word query. Very unusual feature because of which it was separated from rickettsia. It is not found in rickettsia, this feature. It has got two variants, a small cell variant and a large cell variant. A small cell variant actually resides in the environment, and it is highly resistant to the physical and chemical stresses. So therefore, it is capable of surviving in the soil for months and years. Then there's a large cell variant which actually infects the cell and it is a form which actually is metabolically active and multiplying. So the small cell variant is actually the infective stage. You get infected through the small cell variant. In the body, it infects the cell and converts into a large cell variant, and this is the form which multiplies and causes the disease. So please try to understand these two morphological forms. In addition, the organism is said to have a phase variation. So it's the outer LPS. LPS is a classical feature of gram-negative bacteria. So it has got two phases of lipopolysaccharide, that is phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is basically the intact LPS, while phase 2 is an organism in which the outer part of the LPS is actually deleted. So the outermost O antigen sugars are not there. Okay. And because of the small cell variant, as I said, it can survive in harsh environmental conditions. This is not the case with rickettsia. This is an exception, and that's why one of the reasons it was separated from rickettsia. So it can survive in soil and milk for years together. The organism has got a wide host range, large number of different types of mammals, birds, ticks can be involved. And the principal reservoir basically the farm animals, like sheep, cattle, and goat. And therefore, the people who actually are working with the farm animals are the ones who usually get infected with this disease. The organism is found in huge numbers in the placenta of the infected livestock. So if that placenta actually dries up and is there in the soil gets heavily contaminated. Then also in the feces of the infected animal, urine, also in the tick feces. Okay. Now, please remember, for the transmission of infection amongst the animals, you require tick bite. But for the infection to be transmitted to the human, no tick bite is required. So for Coxiella burnetii, you do not require the insect for transmission. Please remember it as a golden rule. A lot of questions are asked on this. Okay, and many of your books actually give wrong statements. So no tick is required for infection transmission in the humans. Ticks are required for transmission of infections between animals, but not humans. Human infections chiefly occur because of inhalation of the airborne particles. So suppose the soil is contaminated with the placenta, which is dried up, and it is infected. So if you disturb the soil, it comes into the air, you get infected through inhalation. Another route of transmission is by ingestion of the unpasteurized milk. Suppose you drink the milk of the animal and you've not pasteurized it, you can get infected. As I said, no transmission by an insect vector is not transmitted to the tick. The disease has got a worldwide distribution, okay? And the disease, as I said, occurs in ranchers, in veterinarians, food handlers. These are the people who usually get the infection, okay? People who work in abattoirs also are a high-risk job. Okay. Now, what is a clinical manifestation? Again, a very unusual clinical manifestation if compared with rickettsia. In rickettsia, a chief feature is rash. Q fever is an exception to the rule. In Q fever, you never get rash. Please remember it's a golden rule. Okay, so that's another PG question that you get in your exams. Which of the following infections you never get a rash as a manifestation? Please remember it is Q fever. Majority of the infections, however, are asymptomatic infections. They usually start as non-specific symptoms like fever, headache, myalgias, and obviously by these symptoms you cannot differentiate whether it is rickettsia or Coxiella. But later on, complications occur like in the form of pneumonia and hepatitis. So therefore, there is involvement of the lung because infection occurs through inhalation and can also involve the liver. This is called as acute infection. In some cases, the infection persists for more than 6 months, and then we call it as chronic Q fever, and it can persist for months to years. And this usually happens in people who've got a pre-existing valvular heart disease or are otherwise immunocompromised. So अगर पुराना valvular heart disease है या immunosuppressed है तो वो predisposing features होते हैं. And a very important chronic Q fever manifestation is subacute endocarditis. Okay, a lot of questions are again asked on this. You get subacute endocarditis, and it is usually not diagnosed because you don't have a high index of suspicion to be able to even think about the presence of this organism, and because of which you don't diagnose, and it is associated with very high mortality. How do you diagnose Q fever? Again, you can do culture, but it is rarely performed because it is a very dangerous organism to handle, so only specialized labs are allowed to do the culture. But most of the times, routine diagnosis, we do not do culture. PCR is also available, but again, it is not very commonly done. Most important test for diagnosis is serology. A very important set of questions are asked on serology also. Herein, the importance of phase antigens are important. In acute Q fever, you get high titers of antibodies against phase 2 antigen. In acute Q fever, high titers of antibodies are formed against phase 2 antigen. Whereas in case of chronic Q fever, you get high titers of antibody against the phase 1 antigen. And that's how actually you are able to differentiate between acute Q fever from chronic Q fever. So you get a clinical history of Q fever and you get the laboratory findings, and then you are asked to actually diagnose. So please remember these important findings. And the tests which are available are indirect immunofluorescence antibody test or IFA, which is very commonly done, and also ELISA tests are also available now. The drug of choice for acute Q fever is doxycycline, whereas for chronic Q fever, we can give a combination of doxycycline with hydroxychloroquine. You all must be familiar with HCQ nowadays because HCQ is was being given till now for treatment of SARS-CoV-2 also. That's the same HCQ that we're talking about. So with this, we are through with rickettsia as well as Bartonella, Coxiella. Now we come to the next zoonotic infection, which is caused by Bartonella. Again, lots and lots of questions, particularly in your entrance exam. We generally don't ask these questions in your prof exams, but a lot of questions you get in your entrance exams that you need to be aware of. So these are Bartonella are gram-negative cocobacilli, small-sized bacilli, and they've got fastidious growth requirements, and there are 3 medically important species that you need to be aware of. I'll tell you the important questions that are asked in your PG entrance just a few moments from now. These 3 species are Bartonella bacilliformis, Bartonella henselae, and Bartonella quintana, and all of these are associated with particular animal reservoir. And a classical clinical manifestation that you get with all Bartonella is recurrent fevers you get, and the organism actually leads to the proliferation of blood vessels. So that's a very unusual clinical presentation that you get, or involvement of the blood vessels that you get with Bartonella. Okay. Earlier, Bartonella were also classified as rickettsia, but then they were removed from rickettsia because Bartonella are not obligate intracellular. They can be grown on artificial medium. One by one, we are going to cover. I'm just going to talk about the important points, nothing else. Bartonella bacilliformis. This disease is prevalent in certain parts in Latin America, like in Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. And the insect vector which transmits the infection is sandfly. It is the insect vector which transmits the infection. The organism multiplies within the erythrocytes as well as endothelial cells. It causes two diseases, and these are the perfect questions that you get in your PG exam. These are Carrion's disease and Oroya fever. Carrion's disease, basically, Carrion's disease is named after a medical student who actually worked to define the link between Verruca peruana and Carrion's disease. Unfortunately, this medical student died while experimenting this bacterium on himself. Though he proved the cause and the link between the two, but he died in the process. To honor this medical student, we call it as Carrion's disease. Later on, it is also called as Oroya fever. This disease manifests in the form of acute hemolytic bacteremia. You get acute hemolysis, and this manifests in the form of severe anemia. After this disease, the person develops a disease thereafter, which manifests and involves the skin, and this is called as Verruca peruana. Peru comes from this, the name of the country where the disease is prevalent, and Verruca means it is a verrucous lesion which involves the skin. So it is a chronic vasoproliferative form which involves the skin, and you get cutaneous nodules. So Carrion was the medical student who actually linked the Carrion's disease with Verruca peruana, or Oroya fever with Verruca peruana, and in the process laid down his own life. And that's why, to honor him, we call it as Carrion's disease. So if the question is asked, what is the vector which transmits Oroya fever, Carrion's disease, Verruca peruana, the answer would be sandfly. And all of these are questions. Carrion disease is caused by, Oroya fever is caused by, Verruca peruana is caused by Bartonella bacilliformis. And what is the vector for Bartonella bacilliformis? Sandfly. All these are standard questions you get in your entrance exam. Then we've got Bartonella quintana. Bartonella quintana, it causes a disease which is called as trench fever or 5-day fever. The meaning of the word quint is 5. This is because you get fevers of 5-day intervals, and that's why we call it as Bartonella quintana. Quint ka matlab 5 hota, and that's how you can pick it up. The insect vector is a body louse. So now, today itself, I've talked about 2 diseases which are transmitted by body louse. Quickly answer दीजिए मुझे, कौन-कौन से 2 diseases हैं जो body louse से transmit होते हैं? Pediculus humanus से. एक तो ये है Bartonella quintana, दूसरा कौन सा बताया था मैंने? Quick answer दीजिए. Quick answer दीजिए. Vivek, I'm going to answer your question a bit later. Relapse and the 2 difference. Just wait. Right now, give me the answer to this question. Body louse से transmit होने वाले 2 infections बताइए. एक तो ये है, दूसरा कौन सा था? The second one that we talked about was epidemic typhus. It means you were not listening. Okay. The disease manifests in the form of headache, fever, weakness. And fever, as I said, is for 5-day intervals, and that's why the name Quintana. In immunocompromised people, like in HIV positive, it can cause a skin disease, which is called as bacillary angiomatosis. In bacillary angiomatosis, you get vascular lesions. You get vascular lesions. Okay, you're answering. Got it. Thank you. Good. I could not see your responses. Sorry. So you get bacillary angiomatosis. These are vascular lesions that you get in immunocompromised people, not in immunocompetent people, like HIV positive. Okay. Bartonella henselae, a lot of questions are asked. Bartonella henselae, the animal reservoir is the cat, and the disease occurs usually after a cat bite. After a cat bite. And the disease that it causes is referred to as cat scratch disease. So after a cat bite, you get a chronic lesion in the suppose the cat is bitten on the finger, on the finger you will get it, and this is associated with the regional lymphadenopathy, and the most common regional lymphadenopathy that you get is epitrochlear lymphadenopathy is involved, epitrochlear lymphode. And in addition, if people who are immunosuppressed, like in HIV/AIDS, you get cystic blood-filled lesions in the organs, like hepatic pileosis and splenic pileosis. These are cystic lesions in the liver and spleen in solid organs that you get. In addition, it can also cause bacillary angiomatosis and HIV/AIDS again. So there are 2 causes of bacillary angiomatosis. The other is Bartonella Bacilliformis, and this one, Bartonella enthele. In addition, you get cystic blood cell lesions in liver and spleen, hepatic biliosis, and splenic biliosis. So with this, we are through with Bartonella. And now we come to the last of the zoonoses for this session. Next session, I'm going to talk about many more. These are Leptospira. Leptospira, please remember, are spirochetes. These spirochetes are very thin, cannot be seen by light microscopy because they are so thin, and they've got hooked ends. This is the transmission electron micrograph picture which is being shown over here. Okay, and it has got hooked ends. Okay, just to give you an idea how it is visible. There are many species, but only one species is pathogenic for us, which is called as Leptospira interrogans. And these are the ones which are associated with disease in us. Within Leptospira interrogans, you've got multiple serotypes, which cause infection in humans, and many of these are associated with typical animals. They are obligate aerobes, and they can be grown on artificial medium at 28 to 30 degrees centigrade. They usually grow at lower temperatures. So this is another picture. This is basically, this was a scanning electron micrograph picture. This is a transmission electron micrograph picture. These are motile by endoflagella. These are the axial filaments, okay, which are there. Now, what is the pathogenesis and immunity? Mostly it causes a subclinical infection, which you don't even come to know. In some cases, you get a mild influenza-like febrile illness, while in others, you might get a severe disease. And this severe disease is called as Weil's disease. Now, for God's sake, don't confuse Weil's disease with Weil-Felix reaction. Weil-Felix reaction is a serological test that we do to diagnose many rickettsial infections, while Weil's disease is a severe form of disease which is caused by Leptospira. Severe leptospirosis is called as Weil's disease. The spelling is the same, it sounds the same, but they are totally different. Don't ever confuse Weil's disease with Weil-Felix reaction. Okay? So I hope you got the point. Sometimes we play with words which are similar sounding to extract wrong answers from you. So please don't let us do that. The infection occurs when the organism penetrates through the mucous membrane or through the skin. Through the skin, it cannot penetrate through the intact skin. However, if there is a pre-existing cut or an abrasion on the skin, it can penetrate. Okay? And once it penetrates either through the mucous membrane or through the skin, non-intact skin, it enters into the blood and then multiplies in the endothelium of the blood vessels. It can lead to hemorrhage, and it can also involve the liver and the kidneys. Okay. Now, once you develop an immune response, you are able to basically counteract the infection. The disease is worldwide. In India, a lot of cases are reported. Lot of cases, just me. Hello. Yes, बोलिए. हाँ, मैं अभी थोड़ा बिजी हूँ लेक्चर में, टॉक अबाउट इट लेटर. Sorry. So the disease is very much prevalent in our country. Lot of cases are reported from Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Andaman, Karnataka, Maharashtra, in particularly the southern part, western part of our country. In fact, by some estimates, it is considered to be the most common zoonotic infection in the world. Okay, so if somebody asks what is the most common zoonotic infection in the world, it's considered to be leptospirosis. A lot of questions are asked on this. 3 R's are associated with. The 3 R's that you need to remember are rats, rainfall, and rice field. Rat, rainfall, and rice field. We'll talk about the 3 R's and try to justify them. Just wait for a moment. The reservoir host are various different types of animals, but the most important animal is rat, where endemic chronic infection occurs. In the animal, it does not cause a severe disease. In the animal, it multiplies in the renal tubules, and therefore it is shed in urine in large numbers. And this urine starts to multiply, starts to get shed in the urine and starts to contaminate the water, like rivers and streams. Normally, nothing happens to us. Humans, they get infected in heavy rainfall. When the heavy rainfall occurs, the rat burrows are flooded. And because the rat burrows are flooded, the rats come onto the surface and they start to contaminate the surface water. And then you get infected. And therefore, the main season where the large number of outbreaks of leptospirosis occur are the rainy season. It basically is in the rainy season. So it is in July, August, September, you start to get large many cases of leptospirosis. Okay. Human, however, is a dead-end host. There is no person-to-person spread which occurs in leptospirosis. So if I get infected with leptospirosis, I cannot infect you. And there is no chronic carriage which occurs. So outbreaks in rainy season. So rats, rainfall, and rice field. So why rice field? In the rice field, if you know, you have to immerse your hand and field in wet soil. And this is infested with rats. So people who work in rice fields are also at high risk of contracting the infection. And that's why rats, rainfall, and rice field. So I've tried to justify these three R's. Most infections are subclinical infections, and you don't even get to know that you've got this. In a biphasic illness, the initial phase is just like an influenza-like illness, like fever and myalgia, and it usually in most of the cases resolves. In some cases, however, severe infection occurs after the non-specific symptom, and this is because of the hemorrhage which occurs because of the damage of the endothelium in the form of pulmonary hemorrhage, there's thrombocytopenia, and there's damage to the liver and the kidney. So the liver enzymes are raised, you've got jaundice, and the kidney gets damaged, so there is raised urea and creatinine. And this disease has got a very high fatality, about 10 to 15%. This is called as Weil's disease. The other name for Weil's disease is icterohemorrhagic fever. So if I say Weil's disease or icterohemorrhagic fever, it means the same. Ictero means jaundice, hemorrhagic means hemorrhage. So icterohemorrhagic fever or Weil's disease. Now, how do you perform the laboratory diagnosis of leptospirosis? We can collect the sample from the blood. In the first 10 days, the organism can be detected in the blood, but most of the cases actually reach the hospital after 10 days. Hence, we are not able to demonstrate the organism in the blood. So first 10 days in the blood, the organism can be demonstrated. Urine, however, it cannot be demonstrated in the first week. However, after first week to as long as 3 months, the organism can be demonstrated in the urine. In blood and urine, you do direct microscopy by the dark field microscopy. Normal microscopy, it wouldn't be visible because it is too thin. Having said that, it is poorly sensitive. So even if the organism is there in large numbers, you will not be able to see it that well. So it is not particularly rewarding. We can culture the organism. As I said, it can be cultured on an artificial medium. So we can culture on EMJH medium. A lot of questions are asked on EMJH. The full form is named after the people who described this medium. This is Ellinghausen, Mikolo, Johnson, Harris medium, Korthoff's medium, and Fletcher's medium. So this is dark ground microscopy picture of blood. You can see the spiral organism with the hooked ends. That's why it is called as interrogens. Interrogens का मतलब होता है question पूछना. So the ends are in the form of question mark. That's why the name Leptospira interrogen. Okay, so you can slow growth occurs on culture. We can also do PCR to demonstrate the DNA. Now, mainstay, however, is serology. Okay, the rest of the techniques are not very rewarding. So, most important serological test for diagnosis is microscopic agglutination test, where you take live suspension of Leptospira that you've cultured and mix it with the patient's serum. And if the serum contains the antibody, it will agglutinate the Leptospira, and you see it under a dark ground microscope. You can see the agglutinated. These are the agglutinations that you get, and you see it under a dark ground microscope. And this is considered to be the gold standard serological test for diagnosis of leptospirosis. Other serological tests are also become available. Microscopic agglutination test is in short referred to as MAT. If MAT is not available, MAT can only be done by reference labs because it is difficult to do. Alternate tests like ELISA and other rapid tests are also now become available. Penicillin or doxycycline is given for treatment. If you want to give a chemoprophylaxis for the disease, you can give doxycycline. Okay. With this, we are through with the session. Now we'll ask some questions. We'll cover some questions and see whether you're able to answer or not, based on what we have discussed. Which of the following statements about epidemic typhus is most correct? It is transmitted by ticks. Mice are the reservoir. Historically, the disease occurs in times of prosperity. Recrudescent infection can occur many years after initial infection. Quick answers, beta. Batao. So what do you think is correct? Very good, Prakhar. Shashwat, very good. Correct kya hai, beta? So we'll just discuss. It is transmitted by ticks. Strong. Epidemic typhus is caused by Rickettsia provocaci, and it is transmitted by body louse, Pediculus immunis, and not ticks. Mice are the reservoir. Epidemic typhus, as mentioned, is what? Epidemic typhus is not a zoonotic infection, so there is no animal reservoir. Historically, the disease occurs in times of war, in times of deprivation. Okay, so not in times of prosperity. Okay, recrudescent infection, as I said, occurs called as a Wilson's disease many years or months after you recover from epidemic typhus. The organism is still latent and can reactivate and can cause recrudescent infection. Very good. Answer is D. Question number 2. Which of the following diseases is most likely to be acquired from a mite? Endemic typhus, scrub typhus, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Trench fever. Quick answers, beta. Which is a mite-borne infection? So let's see. You should be able to answer this question. Endemic typhus is transmitted through rat flea, Xenopsilla chopsis, and the causative agent is Rickettsia typhi. Scrub typhus is caused by Orientia tsutsugamoshi, and the vector is mite. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is caused by Rickettsia rickettsii, and the vector is heart tick. Trench fever is caused by Bartonella quintana, and the vector is body louse. So what is the answer? B. Scrub typhus. Very good. Scrub typhus is the answer. All of these are very, very common questions that you get in your exam. Question number 3. All of the following is true about Q fever except. So what is wrong? Infection may be acquired through inhalation. Characteristic clinical manifestation is generalized rash. Chronic infection is associated with high mortality. It has a worldwide distribution. Quick, very good. So infection may be acquired through inhalation. Yes, inhalation as well as inoculation while handling the animal, or it can also be transmitted through ingestion of contaminated milk. Characteristic clinical manifestation is rash. I mentioned as an exception, you never get rash in Q fever. The main manifestation is fever with hepatitis, with pneumonia, and in some cases you can also get subacute endocarditis. Chronic infection is associated with high mortality. I mentioned that it is worldwide in distribution. So very good. The answer for question number 3 is B. Very good. Question number 4. The pathogenic leptospirae, what is the correct answer, are usually transmitted from human to human by droplet infection, have never been cultured in artificial medium, can be identified in blood smears as gram-negative, tightly coiled spirochetes, are harbored in the renal tubules or renal of reservoir host. So which is the correct statement? Quick answers, beta. Which is the correct statement with regard to leptospira? Let's see. All are usually transmitted by human to human by droplet infection. As I mentioned earlier, there is no human to human transmission which occurs with leptospira. You acquire it from the rodents to humans through the contaminated water, but there is no further human to human spread. They have never been cultured in artificial media. We can very well culture it on an artificial media, and mentioned about 3 culture media that are available for culture: EMJ medium, Korsakoff's medium, and Fletcher's medium. Can be identified in blood smears. gram negative tightly coiled spirochetes. बेटे यहाँ सब कुछ ठीक है. gram negative गलत है. You cannot do gram staining. And how you can demonstrate in blood smears? Not by gram staining. By what technique? Quick answer. Everything is correct in this statement. Gram negative गलत है. By dark ground microscopy. It is by dark ground microscopy. Gram staining से नहीं दिखता बेटा. And therefore the correct answer is harbored in the renal tubules of the reservoir host, is shed in the animal urine, contaminates the water. You get infected when you come in contact with the contaminated water through the organism enters through the cut skin, pre-existing cuts on the skin, or through the mucous membrane. Good. Last question. Which of the following diseases is transmitted through sandfly? Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Carrier's disease, Brill-Zinsser disease, Q fever. Quick answer. Sorry, I've already given you the answer. So which of the following is transmitted to sandfly? Quick answers beta okay? Good. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is transmitted through heart tick. Carrier's disease, which is caused by Bartonella bacilliformis, and it is transmitted through sandfly, also called as Oroya fever. Brill-Zinsser disease does not have any insect vector because it is a reactivation illness. And Q fever is not transmitted through an insect vector. It is through inhalation, inoculation, or ingestion of contaminated unpasteurized milk. So what is the answer? The answer is very good. The answer most of you have given is very good. It is B. Okay. So I sincerely hope that this session was useful to you. Again, I'm reiterating very important set of questions, especially for your entrance exams. And rickettsia as a topic itself is very important for your exams, your prof exams, and also a lot of questions in Viva can be asked. So I hope this session was useful for you, and you gained, I hope, something out of it. Thank you very much for attending this session. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you. So any questions? I can take some questions. We have got 2-3 minutes if you have any questions. There was a question that was asked. Relapse and recrudescence, beta. Relapse and recrudescence is a term that we use for malaria. Okay, we don't use anywhere else. So when we talk about malaria, I'm going to talk about relapse and recrudescence, but not in this context. Okay. So please don't use the word relapse and recrudescence. These are the two terminologies used in relation to malaria. Okay. If you got any other question, I can take that. Otherwise, I can close. Still got 2-3 minutes. Yeah. Please don't confuse wheel flakes with MIF beta. MIF test detects the antibody against the organism, and in Bill-Zinzer's disease, it will be able to detect. In wheel flakes reaction, we are using a different antigen system, so it doesn't evoke that much response. But in Bill-Zinzer's, yes, it may be able to detect the antibody response. You asked a very good question, Shashwat. Any other question? I think it will be notified to you in your first terminal exam whether this will be a part or not. Your first terminal syllabus. Please contact the faculty concerned, and he or she would be able to tell you whether this will be part of the syllabus or not. Any other questions, beta? Shall we close now? Is that okay? Thank you, beta. Thank you very much. So I'm going to close this session. Thank you very much.